last meetup of 2024. You want to visit, hosting us and get. We always love the places that provide food too, because it makes my job 90% easier. Like, I'm not even joking. This is your first time at a meetup at one of our 4 meetups. So Forge Utah is a nonprofit. We do a bunch of events and meetups. We also have a great Slack community where you can go ask Joe questions, and Joe actually responds on this Slack.
Sometimes.
So when he's not on a plane or in Helsinki or Australia or weird time zone difference. So if you just go to utah.tech, that's our website. There's a button right in the middle. You click it, you press join. There's great channels on there. There's machine channel, random channels. Events in Utah get posted, so it doesn't matter. All the events. I know we have in Utah. Have events regularly, so like that. And yeah, we will be having meetups next year. Next meetup is at Recursion in January. We'll be back here in February. And we will be doing some kind of hackathon for Utah Tech Week.
When's that?
Utah Tech Week is January to the 4th of February.
That's a whole week.
It is a whole week. And if you've ever heard of Tech Week, all it is a bunch of people host their own events. Tech Week just compiles them into a single calendar for you. So you sign up, you get the newsletters. There's VC events, there's women in business marketing, tech company events, which I think is shouldn't be part of Tech Week, but it's there. And yeah, we'll be doing some kind of hackathon because we want to put. According to Collins, we want to put the tech back in Tech Week. So VC. So.
It was kind of a tech bro week last year.
Hey, it's going to be this year, except for the 2 events I run.
Yeah, exactly.
Just come to my events. Well, we want to thank it's Byron, right?
Yep.
Byron volunteering to speak. He said, "Hey, I want to talk about this," and I was like, "Sorry, the MLOps meetup is super booked, but I've got this great data engineering meetup, and we all love data." So, yeah. And I have, if you haven't heard one more thing. So my friends from Outer Bounds, who I've never met before, but they had a booth across from my booth, like if you come. Hosting and stuff for your AI app. They sent me shirts. So they're just right here in front of my computer. After Byron's talk, come grab an Outer Bounds shirt, and there's 1 brochure and a bag, 2 bags. Anyway, feel free to come grab some stuff. But
For Outer Bounds, so really.
so yeah, it's all your turn.
Okay. Do I need to, should I move to that side or does the camera, can the camera move? Or does it matter if I'm not on?
Man,
No, I don't read more than I have to hear. I'm trying to figure out where to put this. I'm not.
it's like super loud.
Just right there.
Oh, I think you're right here.
Right up here. Yeah, that's what I'm worried about too. Would this side be better? Let's see.
Are you gonna stand up or sit down?
A little both. Probably mostly standing.
Gosh.
That's what I tried to figure out earlier. Let's stand.
It was definitely
Yeah.
better.
Do that.
I agree.
Even the other.
That's, yeah, it's going through. That sounds way better. Okay. All right. So this is how I build Gen AI apps. I thought about what do I call this? It's such a new type of product that we can build that I didn't want to sound. I don't want to say this is the definitive way of doing it. This is how I do it. Maybe right, maybe wrong in some ways, but I found it to be pretty successful in the products that we've been implementing. at my company, which is Avant. So first off, I don't think any of you probably know who I am, so let me introduce myself. My name is Byron McKay. I work at Zavant, which is actually just across the street here, so I'm very familiar with this area. When I started, I was actually a mobile engineer for a decade. Did Android and iOS and backend for a couple of years in there, but built a lot of apps. I have a great appreciation, I think, for building user-friendly apps. I would say I've helped a lot of people. They would come in with ideas of what they want to build, and I would often say, "Well, that's a good idea in principle, but the way you have it laid out is not going to work very well for the users." So I would do a lot of that kind of back and forth with people and figure out what looked and felt right, and then I would build it. But after 10 years of that, I had an itch that I really wanted to scratch, and that itch was teaching. I've always wanted to be a teacher. In fact, when I came out of school, those were my two options. Well, actually, I had three options when I went to college of what I wanted to do. There was software engineering, teaching, or being an accountant. And I really hated my accounting classes, so that one was an easy no. But I always loved teaching, but the salaries for tech were just too good. So got into that and loved it. I still love it, still do it, but I always wanted to teach. So for a while there, I was teaching software engineering at Bloom Tech, if any of you are familiar with that. Had a great time doing that, and it was really interesting for me to be in a non-tech role. Sort of, I was teaching tech, but I'm not an engineer, but I'm doing something else, which for me opened up a lot of opportunities. I built a lot of fun software while I was there teaching because I just felt like there were a lot of inefficiencies. And if you're an engineer like me, you see inefficiency and you just cringe and you have to fix it. So you build something. So that's what I did a lot while I was there. And then after doing that and teaching courses in backend and in data science, and looks like my screen up here went. Oh. Here, you still see it? Okay.
Okay, no, it's not his screen.
So anyway, after doing that, and ChatGPT came out, and that changed the world as we all know it. And at the time, we were working on a data science course, and I started building different. I saw opportunities with it, as I'm sure all you did. So I had curriculum editors, and I had quiz generators, and it was so fun, and I just knew I had to get back into it. So long story short, I ended up at Savant, and now I'm their principal AI engineer there, which has been a lot of fun. And so we've built a couple of products in my time there. It's only been about, I've been there since May, maybe April. So it hasn't been too long, but we've done a few. And I've had some successes, and I've had some that didn't quite work out. So I've had some lessons learned there. I'm going to share those with you all today. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, there's an agenda. There's a three-part agenda. The first and the last are short, and the middle one is where the meat is. But I first want to start off by talking about the big three. These are what I call the big three. These are the things I absolutely need to have in every project, or else it does not work. And that's not just me saying it. That's literally how my projects have gone. So I want to tell you just about those three because I think it's that important that they have their own slide and we call them out. After that, I'll get into the steps of building generative AI apps and what that's been like for me. These steps are in a order. It's not a definitive order there, but I put it in the best order that I usually see it happen. And then finally, we'll have a wrap up. I'll have a page at the very end with a cheat sheet of everything we've talked about. So if you're going to screenshot anything, I would recommend that be the one. Okay. So the big three. Like I said, in every project I've ever done, I need these three things, and if they're not there, then the project doesn't work. So the first one is expert. You need the expert of the process you're trying to mimic. A lot of times with generative AI, we're trying to mimic human behavior, trying to take a human process and turn it into something that can be, done with an LLM. In fact, I always tell people, I found when I first showed up that we were all still trying to figure out what's a good use case for generative AI. And I've come up with a little saying, a little statement that I say, and that is, if there's anything that a human reads and then does something as a result of that reading, that is a use case for generative AI. And that's true about all the projects that we've done, especially the ones that have been pretty successful that we've done. So it always kind of comes back to it. When we're all done building, I can look back and I can see, yep, sure enough, like every time we use an LLM, it follows that rule. A human used to do this. Now they don't have to do it, or they don't have to do it as much. So anyway, if you're going to mimic something, you have to know who the expert is that does that. Now, a lot of times it might be you. If you're building a generative AI app, say for some systems thing or some coding thing, you want to integrate it with GitHub so you can have it write your commits for you, whatever it is. You might be the expert, in which case you're done. You've already found the expert. In all my projects, I'm not the expert. The company I work at is a pharmaceutical analytics company. This is my first job in healthcare. I have no idea. I have a hard enough time reading the medicines on prescription bottles. Any of my coworkers will tell you that. So I don't know what's going on half the time. And so when these projects come in, I need the expert to be with me and be a partner with me in the project. If they're not a committed partner to the project fails. And my project, the ones that have failed, usually because the expert wasn't as available as I needed them to be. Number two, context. We talked about context a lot when it comes to generative AI. Context in your prompts, you need context. You have RAG, that's gathering context. You need to know where the context is coming from, and you need to be able to have access to it. The expert is the person that's probably going to help you get there if you don't have it readily available. But absolutely important. If you don't have the right context, it's going to be a very slow moving project because nothing's going to be able to get done. And the final thing is evaluations. The funny thing about generative AI is how good it is at sounding like it's right. I'm sure you've all heard that before. You've all seen it before. An evaluation is kind of like a test. It actually runs your app through a series of items that have been, here's the input, here's the expected output. It scores it for you. It tells you how good you're actually doing. If you don't have that and you're just going off of your gut, it's probably not going to work very well. You need to have something that tells you things are moving in the right direction so that when you update your prompts or you change the LLM you're using, you can definitively say, this is making an improvement. So these are the big three. You have to have your expert, you have to have your context, you have to have your evaluations. Otherwise, the project will just not work. And I can tell you from my experience that anytime a project doesn't work, it is missing at least one of these. So I wanted to point that out. That's step 0 if there's steps involved here. But yeah, I wanted to make a big deal. And you'll hear me kind of refer to these again and again throughout this presentation. Okay. So first thing I do with any project is I got to make sure I have an observability tool. What is an observability tool? It's basically your logger, your metrics related to the LLMs that you call. It'll track every call you send out to your LLM. It'll track the inputs, it'll track the outputs, it'll track all the steps it took to get there. It'll also is a good place to store your prompts, good place to store your evaluations, good place to store those data sets that those evaluations will work off of. It'll all be stored there, and it's an absolute must. You got to have one of these. It's just too hard to manage otherwise. You have no historical data if you don't, unless you've built something for yourself. The most popular one I've seen out there is called Langsmith. It's done by a company called LangChain. It's a very, very robust product, almost too robust in some ways. I feel like they have so many features that it's easy to get lost in there. That's my opinion. But I don't know if you've ever used it, maybe you feel otherwise. But it is very robust. So if there's anything you ever want to do with it, like they've probably built it out. Another one is LangFuse. I don't know why Lang always shows up in the beginning of these products, but they have a tendency to do that sometimes. These are two separate companies that build these. LangFuse is actually built over in Europe, but it's an open source product. And so because of that, we can deploy it on our servers and we keep all the data within our company, which is important when you're working in healthcare, as you can imagine. A lot of personal information in there. But anyway, it's an absolute must. This screenshot here is of Langsmith. But you can see here that it has, here's my inputs all right here. Here's my output just for one trace or for one LLM call. But it tells me how much this costs, a whopping, I don't even know how many hundredths of a decimal point that is, but very, very little in this case. And anyway, that does that for all of your calls to your LLM. So very, very useful, very, very important. Okay, gathering ground truth data sets. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about evaluations. If you know what good looks like, you're ahead of the game. That is, again, this is where probably if you're not the expert, whoever is the expert will be able to tell you what that is. And this is the part of the role that they play, why they're so important in this project, in your projects, or at least they have it in mind. They'll help you build that out and identify what's right and what's wrong, which would be very, very useful. When you know what your data, when you have a good data set, it goes a long way in gauging how good your calls are, your LLM calls are doing, which is important when you're working with a non-deterministic product like an LLM, right? You never know what you're going to get. And even after the product is built and it looks like it's great, you still don't know what you're going to get. And it's funny, I'll just say this, it's because there's a kind of something on my mind lately, but it's funny how random they can be, but then at the same time, how consistent they can be. What I mean by that is we just finished a project where I could make the same call to an LLM with a huge prompt and all these examples and everything you want in a robust prompt, and it would error out every single time because the LLM would stick in some random tag every single time in this one prompt. Now I would run hundreds of prompts that were similar in the same structure, never had a problem, but this one always did. So they say they're non-deterministic, but I don't know. My experience, there are times where they're absolutely deterministic, and it drives me nuts, which is kind of funny because you think consistency is key. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so I think I've talked about everything here with your data sets. Very important. You can store these in your observability tool. So once you get that set up, you can throw your data set in there, and it's there for the project. Okay, once you get that far, now you're ready to actually start coding. You can build your initial prompts, your initial code. I'm not here to give a prompting lesson. I would assume that many of you probably have your own ideas of what makes a good prompt and that it's working for you, and that's great. I'm going to tell you two things that I find are extremely beneficial. The first is few-shot prompting. Now, if you're not familiar with what that means, it just means adding examples to your prompt of what you expect the output to be. Few-shot prompting is extremely powerful. I've had prompts where we were getting like 20, 30% accuracy. You add in 3 or 4 or 5 examples, and all of a sudden it shoots up to 80 and 90%. It's very, very, very effective. So of all the strategies that I read about and that people say, I'm a firm believer that few-shot prompting is one of the best. The other is structured outputs. A lot of times we want to extract information from the output, but we don't want to extract all the information because it can get verbose sometimes. And so structured outputs help you just extract just the information you want. Now, there's a couple of ways of doing this. One way is to simply just tell it in the prompt exactly how you want it to come out. And I find that to be pretty effective, actually. Over here is an example of a prompt. All it's trying to do is give me the date out of the file name. This is something we wanted to do. We just want something similar like this in one of our projects, where all the files that were coming into our company had these dates on them. We wanted to extract those dates, but they were coming in all sorts of formats. But an LLM was able to identify that part and pull it out. So I really wanted to make sure I knew what that was, so I could then find the index and then extract it. And anyway, So this is a prompt that, or at least a similar prompt that I used. Down here, you can see I said the extracted date should go inside date tags. No pros, only grab the date string. By the way, saying no pros is one of my favorite ways to get to not talk so much. I find that to be effective as well. But what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying this is the structure I want you to return this in. I want you to put date tags around the date, and that way I can very easily go in if it does get talkative, which sometimes it still does, even when I say don't. I can just as easily still grab the date out of it. So that's the structured output. Now that's a very simple way of doing it, but I still find it to be effective. I'll show you another way I do it in a second. Here's my few shots right here. So I have my input, output, and you see I add the date tags in here, input, output, input, output. And then I say begin, and then I say input, and then I put the file path. This is templated. So your prompt can be templated. You can insert whatever you want into it after the fact. And then I wait for the output. And this structure that I ask it to come out in works every time. So it's been really, really good for us to be able to extract that information. Now, another way you can do structured outputs, there are something called tool calling where you can actually define a JSON structure and say, I want my response to be in this format, and it'll actually give you essentially an object back. Let me show you a little bit what that looks like real quick. Let me see if I can find Postman here. So little personal story here. I have a wonderful wife, and she is a wonderful cook. She's also a very organized woman. If I can, let me flip back to here for a second. Just want to show you, because I think this is pretty incredible. But this is her recipe doc. This doc goes on and on and on and on and on. You can see how well it's put together. After 10 years of marriage and lots of tried and true recipes and lots of failures. Not that many failures. She's actually a pretty good cook. Anyway, there's all our recipes. Now, the first thing to do when I realized that LLMs were accessible, so I actually tried to codify this document because I was so tired of having to click through this and I was just like, can I just do a search? Can I just do something where it can pop it out, or then I could maybe throw it into an API and then she doesn't have to do grocery shopping. She just has to put in her recipes. Anyway, so here's all my contacts. My wife's the expert. And I just wanted to take something like this, banana pancakes, one of our favorites, our family favorites, and just put it into a JSON structure of some sort, and do this for the whole document. When ChatGPT 3.5 was the hot new thing, this didn't work. I couldn't get it to structure this data at all. They weren't even supporting that as a feature. They do now. They weren't supporting it as a feature at the time. I was just trying to say, look, here's my few shots. Here's the structure I want. Here's everything. Failed every single time. It was awful. It was really, really bad. Nowadays, though, I can do that. And if you can see here, it's a little small. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. I have this little endpoint I just hit where I gave it the banana pancakes recipe, and I gave it the JSON structure that I wanted. And you can see right here, it came out pretty good. So I get all my ingredients, the amounts, the units of those amounts, and then down here I have the instructions. And I feel like I can actually do something with this document. So these structured outputs are pretty great. I'll just, let's see here. I'll show you really quick here. Just an example of what that looks like. Let's see. Recipes, output. They're actually just dynamic objects. So there's the structure. I provided this structure to the LLM, and it was able to give it to me perfectly, which is pretty cool. So anyway, enough about the recipes. Let's get back to our presentation here. Okay. So anyway, you build everything out. You got your observability platform set up. You got a data set because you're doing everything that you're supposed to, and you built out your first prompts, and you're scoring, and you're seeing what's going on. You're like, okay, this feels pretty good, right? Well, how do we know it actually feels good? This is where the evaluations come in. You take that data set of right and wrong answers, and the data set will have inputs and outputs. So once you write your prompt, you take those inputs, You feed them all through it. And you expect a certain output, you rate it against the expected output. Now, what is that? Well, how do you verify that something is right or wrong? Well, when you're working with something like I was with the recipe doc, that's actually pretty easy. There's a one-to-one here. You know exactly what you want to get out of it. So you just do a string comparison, you give it a score, and you spit it out, and you get, maybe you get 80%. That would be a great score. That's always my initial goal, is to get to 80%. If I can get there, we're looking pretty good. Other times it may be a chatbot that you're working with. The chatbot needs to convey information or sound a certain way, or shouldn't sound other ways. For example, like it shouldn't be too casual. Maybe it should be professional. Maybe it should sound like a pirate. I don't know. Whatever you want your chatbot to sound like, it's up to you. But it's harder to use some code like a string comparison and say, does this output match that one? When the person asks, what are your hours? You can't do a string comparison because it's going to come out a bunch of different ways. So there's other tactics to evaluate, which you could actually ask an LLM to judge it for you. We call that LLM as a judge. And you can ask the LLM to say, hey, between these two, does our expected, or does our output fit or talk enough or sound like our expected output? Does it have the right information? Does it say the right things? Is it close enough? Give us a score, 1 out of 5, something like that. And you can start to see, when you get this aggregate of tens or hundreds of items in your data set, how good you're doing. Once you have that, then you're really rolling, because now you can change the prompt, you can change the LLM, you can do things and just run it against your evaluations, run it against your data sets, and now you know how well you're doing. When you hit this point, it's almost like this is where I feel like I'm always really flying, like all the way working up till now, I never know actually how well I'm doing, which is kind of unnerving. And then I get the evaluation going and I feel way better. A lot of times, just in case you try this and you don't feel super confident about yourself afterwards, I've had a large number of my initial prompts score like 20%. Like, it's not great. And then again, I'm in healthcare, and I'm not a healthcare expert, so I think it sounds pretty good, but it's actually not. It's actually 20% or 30% or 10%. But a few tweaks here and there, and it shoots up to 50, 60, 70, and eventually to my golden number, which is 80. Eventually we get there. But without these evaluations, I would never know. I would never know. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and just see if there are any questions you guys might have up to this point.
What were you saying were the other? One of them was LLM as a judge. What were the other methods you?
Let's see. So yeah, LLM as a judge is one. A lot of times when I'm using structured output, so I'm expecting a certain format to come back, and properties and values, I can just do a simple string comparison. Yeah, LLM as a judge is good. String comparison. You can ask, depending on your use case, it really just depends on kind of what you're going for. You can ask the LLM just evaluate the correctness of something. And the LLM might have the information inside of it to know if it's right or wrong. Most of what we do at Savant, thankfully, I think, is we're really looking for a certain answer. And so we can do a lot of just, hey, here's the array of IDs that this could be. Does it come out as one? Is it in the set or something like that? Or we're expecting this value here. Is it that or not? So that's really helpful. LLM as a judge is another one. Straight string comparison is another. You can ask the LLM. If you do a little search, you should see a whole lot come up though as well. So
you get human feedback as well if you're interacting with the user.
You are jumping ahead of me, which actually I might. No, almost. We're about 2 slides away. But yes, and that is one of my favorites actually. So we'll get there. I'm gonna let's see. But first, okay. So now you have the evaluation. So now we prompt engineer some more, and we do some LLM selection to find the best LLM for a given solution. This part, as I said before, can only be effectively done with evaluations. Tweak your prompts, swap your LLM. So one strategy here that I really like is having the LLM write the prompt for you. So with your evaluation in place, one thing you can do is at the end, and I have this little flow chart right here, you can see you have the original prompt up here, you pass that through, you use your evaluation to score the output, and typically I would do this for an array of them and then get kind of a final score. And then I would say, okay, LLM, here's my prompt. Here's how it's scored. Here are the outputs we got. Here are the expected outputs. I give it tons of information. I say, make it better. So the LLM will tweak the prompt, change it dramatically or a little bit, and then just set that new prompt up and do it again. And have this iterated 2, 3, 5, 10 times, whatever works. And it's interesting. Sometimes the LLM does extremely well. It takes my 80% and it goes to 90%, 95%. Sometimes it does really, really bad. It takes my 80% down to 20%, down to 0%. I wish I could say I'm kidding, but that's happened. What I find is most interesting, though, is to see how the LLM changes the prompt, especially when the LLM that I'm using to write the prompt is the same LLM I'm using to generate the output. Why? Because what it thinks is important is what it's going to put into the prompt. The words that resonate with it or whatever, however you want to phrase it. But it's going to put in the prompt what it thinks is important. And sometimes it'll come up and go through, and then the same LLM is now the one generating the output with now this prompt that's been generated by itself, knowing what the expected output should be, and it can do quite well. A lot of times what I'll do with that is I won't use the prompt directly, whatever it comes out as. I'll actually kind of study it a little bit and try to figure out what made it better and then kind of tweak it even more. Sometimes it gets too verbose or sometimes it's not. It takes out something that I actually wanted in there that was important. So anyway, just kind of depends on your needs. And I always tell people never accept anything from an LLM blindly. You always want to make sure you verify. That's what I do there. Anyway, that's worked really well. It's really kind of a fun process to watch as well. There are companies that do that. They're trying to make it productize that flow. But with the advent of Cursor and other code generators, I just build my own and use that. So anyway. All right. Human in the loop. This is my one UX part of this talk, and it is by far one of my favorites. Human in the loop is where you have the LLM do part of the process, and then you have a human verify the output. And we use this all the time at Savant with incredible success. Imagine you have a flight, you're trying to do a trip agent where it'll actually schedule the flight, schedule the car rental, schedule the hotel. And you could try to do this blindly, one shot, where it just does all of it all at once. I wouldn't recommend that. It will mess up and you will have a very interesting trip to try to navigate. Instead, what might be useful is to say, hey, go figure out the flight first. You give it some prompting, some idea of what you want, and then come back to me with the result. So in this case, I said before, the AI is coming back. Before I schedule your hotels, how does this flight look to you? So it's Salt Lake City to San Diego, where I'm from, January 14th, departs at 11:15. So me as the user, I get the final say, which I find to be very, very important. Because the LLMs will get things wrong. Like I said, I always shoot for 80%, but I also know in the back of my mind that a human's going to verify anything I put out there anyway. So I'm not too worried about getting to 100%. Not to mention that's just kind of unrealistic to expect. So, so the user here says, no, change the date to the 15th. Well, that's good. We didn't schedule a flight for the 14th. We don't have to cancel anything. We just we're updating the plan. This has been a saving grace for us in a lot of our projects. Getting to 100% or even 99, 95, 90 even can be very difficult. And so knowing that a human's going to verify everything is very comforting as an engineer to know I'm not going to mess anything up too bad. It's their fault if they go with whatever spit out there. Again, I always tell them, don't trust anything blindly from an LLM. One interesting use case for this, though, that I want to point out is we had a project where we were dealing with a type of document called a formulary. And a formulary is essentially a list of drugs that an insurance company covers. And this document is forever long. And they're generally kind of the same, but they're also very distinctly different. And what I mean is that every document follows a different set of rules for how the formulary is structured and to identify certain aspects of each drug. For whatever reason, there's no standard. So every document has to supply a introductory 6 or 7 pages explaining how to read this document because the next one's going to be different. So they all have to have this explanation up front. Well, this was a problem for us because we couldn't do few-shot prompting, and it was killing us. We were making no progress because we couldn't do few-shot prompting because every document was different. So we couldn't provide any examples. Well, then we came up with this idea of what if we had the user write the examples for us? And so what we did was we got 5 random items out of the formulary, and we said, look, here's our best guess. Here's our best guess of what we think this is trying to say. And it was hilariously wrong every single time. But the human would look at it and go, oh, here's what it says in the document. I know what's happening here because I'm a healthcare expert, not Byron, who just builds apps. So he would go through and make the changes and actually create the examples for us. We would then plug those examples in. Those would be our few-shot prompting examples. And it was incredible how much that helped the process because every document's different. We couldn't provide a standard set, but they were because they can read the document very easily. And we provide a summary of the rules of how the styling works and things like that. But that was really, really pretty cool and a really great example of having the human in the loop. So anyway, always have a human in the loop. Speaking of formularies, here's another use case that was kind of interesting where we had involved the human. One of these pages is a formulary, and one of them is an index of that formulary. So I don't need to tell all of you which one looks more like an index and which one just looks like a list of drugs and very specific details about them. Actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a raise of hands here, just really quick. So test time, everybody. Option A is on the left. Option B is on the right. Who here thinks that option A is an index? Okay, you can see we're doing pretty good here so far. Option B, good. Why do I do this? You all said option B. And LLM got this wrong every single time. They could not tell the difference. I would try to explain over and over and over again. I give it examples. I'd say, this is what a formula, I would even go as far as saying like, this page is a formulary. Is this page the same as this page? Yeah, it was, because look, there's numbers right here. There's numbers right here. Therefore, it's a formulary. No. So, anyway, as we were discussing this, we like, how do we get around this? We thought, why don't we just have the human tell us which page is a formulary and which one's not? Just give us a page range. This document's hundreds of pages long. Why don't they just look and really quick? It's really quick for a human to just scan through, as we all demonstrated here, to say what's an index and what isn't. So that's what we did. We don't have an LLM tell us. We have a human tell us. It's not that hard for him. It takes very little energy for a human to look at a document and say, oh, you want pages 7 through 92. That's your formulary range. Oh, okay. Well, we can do that now. So anyway, that's another example of human in the loop, which is kind of it's an interesting one because it's actually before the LLM does anything. But just some extra context, I suppose that was really, really helpful. Okay, so LLMs can differentiate, easier to have a human tell us. All right. So you've done all your work. You got your observability tool. It's logging everything. It's looking great. You got your data sets and your evaluations are high. You're feeling really good about yourself. Then you deploy it. All right. You deploy it. You have human in the loop. What do you do now? Is the project done? No, it's never done, right? So how do we make this better? I said I always like 80%. Well, why 80%? Well, it's a little bit arbitrary, but because of this step here, where we actually leverage the user's feedback. So we come here, we get the prompt, the LLM does its thing, gets a response. We hit that back to the user for feedback, and however they correct it, well, now we know the actual answer, which we didn't have before. Or they might say you got it right, which we also want to know. We pass that into our data set inside of our observability tool. We do this and we let the user run with it over and over and over again. We collect all this information, we put in the data set, and now we have a ground truth live out in the field tested data set that we can then improve our prompts with. We can see what examples we may not have accounted for initially. We can make things a lot better now, and the user doesn't even realize they're doing it. The user is just helping themselves step through this tool that we built for them. But we're collecting all the information so we can make it even better in the future. You tie this in. You could even tie this in with that prompt optimizer that I told you about. So you get to a certain point, and then you say, okay, we got 100 new feedback options that we know is right. You probably want to verify that they are, just to make sure. And then you can say, okay, prompt optimizer, go for it. See if you can make this prompt even better now that we have all this new data. It's a really great way of keeping things going, and maybe you will get closer to that 99% that we all love. All right, last step. You've gone through, you made your app, you're getting the data set back with all this user feedback. When we talk about fine-tuning, fine-tuning is when you add a layer into the LLM that is specifically meant for your use case. So up here, I have a neural network that a lot of LLMs will have embedded in some place in their architecture. And fine-tuning will basically add a layer right at the end. So it'll do all of its work, and then it goes through your layer that you've added in and before giving you your output. Now, I want to put a caveat here about fine-tuning. It's not always necessary, and it's definitely not the first thing you should do. That will be a costly mistake if you did. Probably all the time. The reason is because you don't actually know what you want. You think you do, and I always think I do, and the expert always thinks they do. And then we start getting into it and realize, oh, there's actually a lot more things that we have to take care of. So prompt engineer first, get it out there, get that, tune your prompt until you get to the point where it's like, yeah, this is actually getting us really, really close. Get that data set back from users, get this huge data set of what is, what you expect, and then fine tune. If you even need to. You may not need to. I put down here a few reasons why you would want to. For starters, you have a very narrow focused domain specific problem that maybe the LLM doesn't even know about. Maybe it wasn't trained on that data that you have. So you wanted to give it some more information, some more data so that it can give you better output that way. Sometimes you want to change the LLM behavior. It comes out one way, or a common use case that I see for this is like you want it to sound a certain way when it comes out. Maybe it's like a chat bot, or maybe you just want it to account for some things that it's not currently. So you want to change behavior. Maybe you want to come out with a certain structure. Maybe you have a database that has unique querying syntax that's unique to your company. It doesn't have any of that information. You can prompt engineer that thing all day with hundreds and hundreds of examples, but there are edge cases, excuse me. Those edge cases are hard to account for in a prompt. So if you have 10,000 of these edge cases that you want to just throw into the LLM just so it has it already there, great time to do some fine tuning. I personally have not yet had one of these come up in my projects that I've done where I felt like fine tuning was the answer. We're always able to do it with prompt engineering, human in the loop, that sort of thing. So definitely a step that I would consider doing later if the prompting was just not doing enough. Okay. I think that's all. All right, so here's the cheat sheet. Here's the 7 things that we talked about here today. So feel free to look through that. If you want to have something in there, then you can. This is a good screenshot if you want something to summarize what we've talked about tonight. Yeah, this is again is how we've built apps at Zavant, Gen AI apps at Zavant. It's worked really well for us. I think it's interesting. I'll just kind of end with this little thought. As I go through each of these projects, there's always a point where I'm going, the LLM's not getting it. This is not working out. And it's just, maybe the prompting's not working, or, it's getting worse, or whatever it is. And maybe you felt like that with some of your other engineering projects. I know I have for sure, but it always seems to work out. As long as we have these big 3, as long as we have the expert, as long as we have the context, as long as we have evaluations. Like I said, if I ever have missed a project, or a project didn't work out the way that we thought it would, one of those 3 were missing. So before you begin any of your projects, make sure you've identified what those are. Evaluations can come later. I shouldn't say you should need to start with that. I mean, we talked about it in step. Oh, let's see. There is an 8th one. It's not up here. That's the one I missed. So anyway, we talked about somewhere in the middle doing evaluations. I want to do evaluations immediately at the beginning, but gather the data set if you can. That would be very helpful as you would go forward working on your project. If you know what good looks like, that'll be huge. All right, that's it. That's how we build them, and I hope this was helpful. And I'll stick around for any questions you have.
Any questions?
Yeah. So, in your experience, apart from this flow building the application, what do you think would be the best way to approach hallucination? When, especially in healthcare, we don't want to the LLM go into the sideways, right? And you never know, because sometimes they are programming to a certain variety of randomness.
Yep.
How do you approach hallucination in this case?
Human in the loop is the way that we've usually addressed it. It sounds like a lazy answer, but I feel like it's probably the best. A lot of the AI applications that I've used, they always have a human in the loop aspect to it. And it could be very subtle, like you may not even realize that's what it's doing. But as I've thought about it more and more and use more applications, that's what I always see them doing, because everyone's worried about that. I'm worried about that. And so having a human verify it is probably the way to do it. And I would even go as far as to say that we shouldn't be trying to build applications, Gen AI applications, that try to do 100% of the work. I think they should always do 80% of the work and then let the human finish it out, or 90%, whatever it is, right? But always have a human be the one to actually hit that submit button when all that information's been generated. I do know one company that they allowed their customers, their customers were getting a little frustrated that they always had to hit the submit button. And so they actually built in the option to not, and just let the AI just do it. I would not be able to sleep if I knew that it was something for my company, on my company's behalf, to a customer or to a potential customer, something that's public, especially. I would never want an LLM to just spit it out there. So, do have a really, well, I have an interesting story about that. And I'll tell you really quick. All right. There was an NFL team that decided that they wanted to build a self-automated calling agent to call all of their season ticket holders, previous season ticket holders, and try to get them back in. Now, when you're at that point, you're not going to have a human in the loop because this is a phone conversation that has to happen fast. But they figured, they felt comfortable enough saying, you know what, this is a conversation between one, we could send a sales rep calling them and they'll probably end up the same anyway. So they built this agent that would call all of their season ticket holders, which has a couple of interesting advantages. First, it can call 10,000 people at once. It's not trying to call each person in order. It's just calling 10,000 people at once, which is amazing. We'll talk about volume. The second thing is when a human tries to do something like that, where they call people over and over again, there's a human element there. You get emotional, right? Somebody picks up the phone. Hey, I'm with such and such team. No, I don't want to talk to you. Click. As a human, you kind of hear them. You go, oh, was it me? Was it them? You have to deal with those emotions. An AI agent, an LLM doesn't have emotion, right? So they can call 10,000 people. They can all yell at this LLM. It doesn't care. So that was another advantage that they were having. So what happened? Well, the agent was set up. The LLM, the whole program was set up to kind of learn and evaluate how each call would go to find opportunities of what's working and what's not. And then the future calls, it would implement it. And it would try to do this in real time. What it found was somebody went to sleep one night and woke up the next day and they found that they had just but they had just given away $200,000 in jerseys, because that's what people wanted when they bought season tickets, is they wanted the jersey of their favorite player. So the guy wakes up, goes, oh my goodness, I just, lost $200,000 and now I've got to go tell somebody about this. But the flip side is that they made $800,000 in season ticket sales. Now, I don't know what company or sales rep organization you would have to figure that out and then get it across your team that fast. But an AI, a few LLM calls seem to do the trick. So in my case, with dealing with healthcare and that kind of information, I don't want to take that risk. But in their case, they were willing to. I mean, the people they were past season ticket holders, so they didn't care if they decided that they didn't want to show up to games anymore. They already weren't. So they rolled the dice, and I think they had some interesting findings. Anyway, so there's the story. Any other questions? Yeah.
You tried local models at all, or do you mostly depend on like the APIs that are provided?
Yeah, definitely tried local models. Are definitely getting better. I like Llama 3.2 a lot. I think it's been really fast. I'm running on I'm not sure which processor I actually have. Is an M2 or M3 in this one? I think it's an M3. But it's really, really quick. I've ran some apps with it. They don't always have the same tooling in them as other ones. I'm a huge fan. When I do use APIs, I'm a huge fan of Anthropic. I am not as big a fan of OpenAI's models. That might have to do with my use cases, but generally speaking, I think Anthropic is actually ahead of the game in that term. My opinion, not saying that's what you should tell everybody, but still do your research because it might change. There was one person that can't remember exactly what he said, but he had kind of like, well, I use Anthropic for writing and I use OpenAI for evaluations and I use Gemini for analyzing text, something like that. They apparently found that works for them. So still do your research, but I'm a huge fan of Anthropic. I'm a huge fan of Llama. And then I know there are a lot of other LLMs that are more specific that I've to certain domains that I haven't really played with too much just because they don't always apply to me, but people seem to like them.
So for your feedback loop, when you're sending that back into your data set, is that then an engineer that's going through that feedback? Are you fine tuning with that feedback? Or are you telling the LLM, hey, read this feedback and update yourself with it? What are you doing there?
So I have it automated to where the LLM will go through and take that feedback and try to improve the prompt and then run the evaluations again and see if it can do better. In other cases though, again, I would lean on the expert to actually, again, they they need to know what they're getting into. So that's just a great question, because they need to realize that like you don't know the answer, but they do, and therefore they're the ones that need to validate this data. Just because a human said it looked okay, right? Doesn't mean it was, right? When I see nowadays, when I see like a thumbs up, thumbs down is like you're scoring it. I kind of laugh a little bit because I'm like, anybody can just press the button. That's not doing a lot. So a lot of times for ours, it's like, hey, here's the actual field. Here's the value we came out with it. Change it if it's wrong. Like it's wrong. You go change it. And so we're getting a lot more, and that's what we capture, right? As that data. So they're not explicitly trying to send us feedback. They just are fixing the problem that the tool produced, and then we record it. But yeah, I have the optimizer go through. With other cases, I'll have the expert actually sit down and be like, hey, can you just verify that like all of these are right? Which takes a lot of time. I mean, there can be hundreds. And so they just have to know what they're getting into. And I think that's important to bring up at the beginning of the project to say, look, if you're the expert, this is what I'm going to need from you. I really need you to be a partner in this project. So good question. Yeah.
Did you ever try to do pre-processing of the documents? Like, it looks like you had PDFs that were hundreds of pages. Would it be beneficial to break those out into like tokens and then operate on that as opposed to just feeding in the PDF directly?
Yeah, good question. We do, yeah. So the PDF with the formularies, what I did was we actually turned it into a CSV, page by page, and then we had each page kind of run through our prompts that we wanted to extract the information and get and restructure it in ways. And so there was definitely some pre-processing there. One interesting tidbit there was I was using a PDF library to extract the data, having a really hard time with it because every document's different. Sometimes it's 2 columns, sometimes it's 5, sometimes there's lines, sometimes there's not lines, and it was pretty bad. What we found that was extremely helpful was actually just taking each page and sending it to a multimodal LLM that could do vision, and it would actually just extract it and give us the CSV in like perfect order. Yeah. It was magic. It was really cool. I was really happy that day. Yeah.
Yes. So my question is like, when doing the LLM as the judge, so do you put in the response from the model back to the same element again to generate the rating for that? I think that because you use the same and you're putting the same prompting to that, it might be a little subjective.
Absolutely. You probably wouldn't want to. You probably want to do something different for the judge for that very reason. Yeah. Question. Hey. Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you coming out here tonight. I know we're in that holiday season and things are busy, but it's great to talk to you all. It's great to kind of put this down on paper and get a chat about it. Love doing this kind of work, and it's been a real game changer, I think, for us at our company. You don't have to change. You don't have to do the big projects. A lot of times, it's just finding things inside of the company that are, if you find somebody that's taking, a week to do something because they have to read so much, that should be an alert to you to say, let's see if we can get an LLM to do this. And you'll be surprised at how many of those projects exist and what you can do with it and provide a lot of value as we have it at Savant. So thanks again, and I'll stick around for any questions if you want to keep chatting.